Hey, it's been a minute. I know. We're back and we're going to be talking about another plant. Get your notebooks out, because after the video abstract section, the material that follows is all going to be on the test. On the upside, the test is pass-fail. On the downside, the test is pass-fail. Get yourself situated, moisturized, and in your lane, and get yourself ready to wax poetically about legumes. For those of you who have watched me before, welcome back. Hope you're good. Or, statistically speaking, the majority of you, this is your first time seeing me. Hello, I'm Bobo. I talk about plants, compounds, and science here. The long-form videos are where we take a subject and deep dive it. Today's subject is glycine max, otherwise known by the layman as soybeans. For some of you, this is a very familiar portion of your botanical and culinary history. For others, not so much. So, what are we going to focus on today? First, we'll discuss some of the economic and agricultural realities of soybeans in the world at the time of recording. Production levels, trade, chemicals of interest, etc., etc. We will give a brief overview of the botanical aspects of the plant, genus, species, traits, niche, you know the drill. Then we'll pivot to the history of the plant, its domestication, its adoption, its spread, etc. Finally, we're going to look at some of the culinary/health aspects of the plant, dispel myths, speak to the primary literature, combat misinformation, and more. Because let me tell you, there's a bunch of that. That's the preamble. Strap in. This is where you start taking notes. So let's talk a little bit about why you'd be growing this plant. To say there's a market for soybean and soy-derived products in the world is an understatement. Soybeans are grown for human and animal consumption, obviously. However, there are many products sourced from it, many compounds made from it, many ingredients in both edible and industrial goods that require it. The world is hungry for soy by the multi-metric ton daily. Now, some of these products probably leap to mind depending on your job, your training, your cultural background, or maybe your dietary restrictions. And yes, some of these restrictions can be in reference to vegetarians and vegans. When I said dietary restriction, that's probably the first place your brain jumped to. However, I also want to talk about the flip side of that. Now, it isn't the scope of this video, however, there are medical restrictions with regards to allergies or certain conditions. For some people, they have to avoid certain things that have soy compounds in them. For others, it's the soy products they have to avoid themselves. And if you've ever had to come across someone who has to actively avoid soy or various soy-based products, you'll understand that there's a lot more soy in your day-to-day life than what you originally believed. For people with soy allergies, they need to be careful with packages labeled with natural and artificial flavoring, vegetable broth, vegetable gum, and vegetable starch, or things listing hydrolyzed plant protein, hydrolyzed vegetable protein, protein extender, and protein filler. And while yes, it is a bean, it can be found in some drinks as well. Hell, when I was looking at the Mayo and Cleveland Institute's list of products for doctors to alert their patients with allergies, some vodka drinks were on it. So, what are some of the items we extract from soy that get such wide use? One compound known as soy lecithin acts as an emulsifier. Emulsifiers are chemical substances that stabilize a mixture. The best way I can describe emulsifiers is to use culinary examples. You can blend fluids like oil and water and they might foam up, but no matter how bubbly they get, the mixture will eventually separate. An emulsifier likes the water and likes the oil, but on different sides of itself. So if you blend the oil and water with an emulsifier, it can create a stable matrix between the two. One side holding hands with one, while the other side holds hands with the other. Lecithin is one of these emulsifying compounds. It is readily available, it is a GRAS compound, which means it's generally regarded as safe, and is used extensively. And while I did note the allergies beforehand, the Cleveland medical listings and the Mayo listings noted lecithin as safe for even those allergic to soy proteins, citing primary literature. There are bioactive compounds that are of interest and can be used for a variety of products. The soy plant's biochemistry allows for compounds that are used in solvents, allelochemicals, surfactants, paints, coatings, inks, thermoset plastics, rubbers, adhesives, lubricants, printer toner, and dielectric fluids. So it's not just soy sauce, veggie burgers, and animal feed. Unironically, there's a greater than zero chance that you've used a soy product today before even watching this. Okay, so every country wants it for their products. It has a bunch of uses, and there's a bunch of compounds made from it, etc., etc., etc. Where is it grown, and how much are we actually hauling in here? So the following bits of information have been pulled from the USDA, the EU agricultural sector, the FAO, and the International Soybean Industry Reports, with annual production levels by country, import and export between nations, etc. being taken into account. This is the overall output by everyone. So in the 2024-2025 market, the top sources of beans were Brazil with 40%, US with 28%, Argentina with 5%. With China, India, Paraguay, Canada, Russia, Ukraine, and Bolivia rounding out the rest of the pack. The following shows the production by the top 3 countries from 2016 to 2025. Before 2018, the United States had been the largest source, with Brazil being the second largest. You may note a sudden shift during the 2018 to 2019 world markets. Those changes in the marketplace from 2018 to current were directly impacted by political policies put in place and not due to disease pressure, environmental changes, or market pressure. Those political changes impacted output and markets. They impacted water use, investment, and jobs. Those policy changes impacted things like lead levels in traceable protein powders due to differing regional regulations. See my video on protein regulations and food safeties for more. When looking at the countries in the top 10, their agricultural sectors, regional conditions, labor demographics, and governing policies all contribute to their standing in the ranking. Some markets have more subsidies, some governments have differing loan policies, etc. The public, the government, the regulations in place, and the industry related to a crop all share a complex dance, impacting on how food gets to your plate, how safe it is, who grows your food, and how much it costs in the end. It's almost as if complex issues like agriculture and how it is regulated needs to be nuanced, thorough, and boring, and not gotcha clapback worthy on Twitter. And that the people making decisions on things that impact health and jobs need to tap into experts and listen to them before writing regulations to get online updates. But hey, what do I know? Anyways, now for something completely different. Time to transition from social studies to botany. We've talked about the why and the where of the bean. Let's go into the who of the bean. We haven't addressed the bean. It's just sitting there, in the corner, being ignored. Glycine max is the scientific name for soybeans. They originate and are native to East Asia. Shocker, I know. However, they've been spread to just about everywhere for the previously mentioned reasons, namely food, oil, and interesting compounds. They are angiosperms, meaning they have flowers. Soybeans predominantly grown now have self-fertilizing flowers, so the plants technically don't need pollinators. However, that being the case, the flowers produce a carbohydrate-rich nectar that makes these flowers a very much favored stop for insects. They are in the family of Fabaceae or Leguminosae, and if it wasn't already apparent from the Latin, this is the botanical family of legumes. Soybeans, therefore, are legumes. What makes a legume then, other than just being in that family? They are generally plants that produce seeds that are typically called beans or pulses. Legumes specifically have worked out a type of deal with a microorganism. The microorganism is a bacteria in the genus of Rhizobium. The plant and the bacteria have a symbiotic relationship. That is one where both partners benefit. In this case of symbiosis, the plants grow a structure in their roots known as nodules that the bacteria inhabit. The bacteria are able to take nitrogen from the atmosphere and through reactions change it into a form usable by plants. When the legumes die, the remaining materials break down into the soil into another form of nitrogen. This released nitrogen can then be used by other plants. This nitrogen fixation is key to the nitrogen cycle in soil. The nitrogen cycle is very important because of food. Legumes are plants that work with a bacteria and get nitrogen from the air into the soil in a form that plants can use. The plants use this to make things that we eat. Okay, so you now know what a legume is. Let's talk about the star of the show herself then. Soybeans grow between 3 and 5 feet in size, which is 91 to 152-ish centimeters. In its region of origin, several of the names for it translates to large bean. And if you've seen them grown to harvest, yeah, calling it big bean makes sense. Plant big, pod big. The plant develops nodes where seed pods form and grow after the flowers are fertilized. Variety and environmental conditions impact the amount of harvest per plant though, so the amount of pods may vary quite a bit. The final product, i.e. the beans on the pods, are composed mostly of protein, fiber, and oils. Depending on the variety, some are grown for their oils specifically, while others are used as the whole item. The next thing I want to talk about is how the plant regulates this process of growing, triggering the changes in stages, and how the timing is controlled. So what controls the growth and development of the plant? Like, how does the plant know when to go to the next stage? 2 words. Day length. This next bit we're going to use the soybean to explain how plants know what season they are in. In these plants, the flowering stage is triggered by day length. The flowers won't form until the plant is under a light-dark cycle that promotes the change from vegetative growth to reproductive growth. The length of exposure to light is critical for regulating their life stages. Many plants use this light method to determine the time of the season. If you are not aware, the day length varies in length depending on the time of the year. How does the plant know how long the day lasts? They don't have calendars or clocks. Plants have a series of metabolic activities that occur during the day. It's where they get their energy, so it is key to their growth. I hope this is basic botany. What probably isn't basic botany is the photoperiodic flowering pathways using Florigen cell signaling between the leaves and the apical meristems to create an internal calendar for plants for the purposes of regulating the expression of reproductive traits. What? Okay, let's talk. Before artificial lighting, it was hypothesized that one of the reasons that plants would grow in some latitudes and not others is that they have a method of detecting and responding to light amounts. So if you were to transport a plant out of its native region and the season and the day length didn't match up, they wouldn't be able to grow properly. Which is true, plants have zones, and if you try to grow them outside of their zones, they struggle. Once it was feasible to artificially generate PAR light, PAR meaning photosynthetically active radiation, researchers were able to experiment and test the day length hypothesis. It is a lot easier to turn a light on and off versus quickly changing a plant's latitude. They artificially induced certain day lengths, giving some plants 24-hour-long days, some 12 hours of light, 12 hours of dark, some 8 hours of light, 16 hours of dark, some 16 hours of light, 8 hours of dark, so on and so forth. This led to something being discovered. Once plants were exposed to the critical day length of light for sufficient time, they would switch from vegetative to reproductive life stages. The critical day length is the number of hours of light a day after which a plant goes, "Time to reproduce," and shifts from vegetative to reproductive. Since day length is tied to season by region, this would allow the plant to time its reproductive stage to the appropriate seasonal conditions. These findings sorted plants into 3 general groups: long day, short day, and day neutral plants. Long day will flower if day is long. Short day will flower if day is short. Day neutral, don't care, will flower. This concept is called photoperiodism, determining the best time to flower and reproduce by using the light length throughout the day. Light isn't the only factor controlling development, by the way, as other factors can override the switch and suppress the transition. For instance, apple farmers know that early in the vegetative stage, their trees are hungry for nitrogen. But if the trees keep having a hearty supply of it later in the season, the trees will delay or lessen their fruiting. In this example, the apple trees taking advantage of ample nitrogen and staying vegetative overrides the critical day length signals, partially or fully. So agriculturalists have to keep these other factors that can impact growth in mind. That is the physical expression, but what is the mechanism? For some of you, you will understand that trauma-inducing joke. For the rest of you, can I have a moment of your time and speak to you of our Lord and Savior, MAP kinase? Photoperiodism, the physical expression, relies on a back and forth signal between leaf tissue and meristem tissue. That back and forth chemical chatter is the mechanism. Let's explain the leaf tissue's role, what tissues the leaves are talking to and the roles they play, and how they talk. You probably know of chlorophyll, which are the molecules in the leaves that are key to photosynthesis. There are multiple forms of chlorophyll, the two most prominent are our top being chlorophyll A and chlorophyll B. These two chlorophyll types are 1, the reason why plants are mostly green, and 2, how they actually convert light, water, and CO2 into carbohydrates. Chlorophyll A absorbs in the reddish-yellowish regions, and chlorophyll B absorbs in the bluish regions of visible light, causing the leaves to reflect back the green. So the light hits the leaves, penetrates down into the cells, and hits an organelle known as the chloroplast. Chloroplasts are structures in the plant cells that have these stacked plate structures full of chlorophyll, and they perform photosynthesis. Now, when this is occurring, there are signals going back and forth through the plant. A class of these signals flow from the leaves to a tissue type called the meristem. Meristem is undifferentiated tissue, can grow new portions of the plant, and play roles in regulating growth and tissue type development. There are 3 types: apical, basal, and cambium. The type for today's talk is shoot apical meristem. The other 2 are important, but that's for a video for another day. Shoot apical meristem is a massive tissue in the shoots at the furthest buds. The apical meristem is responsible for the lengthening of plants' limbs, but they also regulate tissue differentiation and growth through hormones. So enter the final players in this dance of photoperiodic regulation: Florigen and anti-Florigen. Hold up, I said the H word on the internet. Yes. We will be discussing hormones, and in what the Lit department would refer to as foreshadowing, this will not be the only section we will be discussing hormones. Warnings to future you. First, what is a hormone exactly? Hormones are small molecule compounds that have a specific shape. They are made by tissues and then released. Then they travel along and have a control effect somewhere else in the organism. So how can a small molecule made by one tissue impact and control the activity of another tissue? Remember how I said hormones were a specific shape? The hormone's specific shape fit into a structure called a receptor. When you have this lock and key binding, the cell that the hormone binds to starts doing something. That something depends on the hormone, depends on the cell, depends on the tissue, and depends on the receptor triggered in question. This basic description is the mechanism in which several complex responses are regulated in many organisms, including us and also plants. Now, the meristem tissues, both in the tippy-top buds of the plant and the tippy-bottom root tips of the plants, produce hormones that disseminate through their tissues and control a lot of plant responses. So if a tissue could send a message through hormones to these meristems, they could impact processes throughout the whole plant. Are you seeing where I'm going with this? There are 2 classes of hormones that are key to our discussion of the mechanisms of photoperiodism: Florigen and anti-Florigen. You can think of one of these as the lights on signal, while the other one is the lights off signal. When the light is striking the plant, the leaves produce the Florigen, and that hormone travels to the apical meristem. When the light isn't striking the plant, anti-Florigen is produced, blocking that signal. This on-off message from the production of Florigen and its suppressor creates a circadian rhythm in the plant. Depending on the pattern, like a wave, the plant can tell what time of the year it is by how long the light hits the leaves. But why would the timing matter so much? Why doesn't the plant just grow in like 20 to 30 days and just throw as much seeds out as possible, not really caring what time of the year it is? Bluntly, survival. In this case, the plant is using Florigen signaling to determine the season. This assessment times the creation of the seed at the point in which it's optimal for them to be made to make it more likely that the seeds will survive and produce daughter plants. They're timing their seed production to the optimal time for the seeds to be released. We just now use this to make sure that the crops are harvested in the times that we want to in agriculture. So, through photoperiod regulation and the communication between the leaves and the meristem via hormone signaling, the plant controls their stages of development, from emergence to vegetative to reproductive and then to seed. The circadian rhythm created by the signaling of Florigen and anti-Florigen allows the plant to go to seed at the proper time in the season. We've hit economics, chemistry, and botany. I think it's about time we talked about history and cultural impact. Because, remember kiddies, the history of a food is tied to the history of a people, and that gets forgotten sometimes with online discourse. Where did this big, beautiful bean come from anyways, and how did it spread? We have multiple candidate regions for the first domestication of soybeans, focusing on China, the Korean Peninsula, Southeast Asia, and Japan, respectively. Some of the literature on this subject is murky due to barriers to source access or just lack of sources, because of the inevitable march of time and its impact on context and provenance. Also, with wild strains and domestication, sometimes a crop that is native to a stretch of close regions gets domesticated in parallel. Then the difference between spreading something and finding that someone had the same idea just one town over gets blurry over the centuries. However, since the early 2000s, several pieces of archaeological work and preserved writings have been able to be cross-referenced with genetic analyses to paint a less fuzzy view of the past. It appears that modern soybeans were domesticated from their wild cousins, Glycine soja, in the flood areas around the Yellow River in ancient China about 6,000 to 9,000 years ago. This could be the case, but for full disclosure, there's also evidence to suggest that both the current wild and domesticated strains actually came from an extinct common ancestor to both of them. And with the range of years on when the first domestication event occurred, whether it was also domesticated simultaneously elsewhere can't be 100% ruled out. It doesn't help that Glycine soja has a native range that spreads throughout China, Korea, Eastern Russia, and Japan. That being the case, some of the earliest writing samples available in China dating back to the Shang dynasty describe agriculture that includes soybeans. These pieces state how this crop has been a staple for the Yellow River region, and in the written record they reference pre-writing sources, supporting the idea that during the Shang dynasty this was not a new crop in the slightest. The crop and its uses are woven into the mythical founding stories of Emperor Shennong, the legendary father of agriculture and a country-founding god emperor. The use of its beans for tofu and its greens for soups are found in poetry and literature throughout the areas of its domestication. That being the case, there are records in ancient Korea, Japan, and many kingdoms in Southeast Asia, all pertaining to their adoption and cultivation as well. Looking at genetic testing, historic documents, and archaeological evidence, the best assessment we seem to be able to make is that the crop we eat today originated in the Yellow River region. Over time, the crop worked its way across trade routes and crossbreeding occurred. Farmers would breed for adaptability, intentionally or not, and select the daughter plants with the most vigor in their crops to grow for future seasons. It is believed that this breeding caused crossing between local related wild relatives and the imported new members, eventually leading to land races being region-specific. As discussed before, the crop is very sensitive to its photoperiod, for good reason. However, the process of selective breeding that this spread promoted, and the islands of plant populations being separated and unable to share their traits outside of their bubbles, led to the crop populations adapting to the seasons and conditions of their areas. This resulted in the thousands of varieties cataloged today with the unique traits that we take advantage of. Through this process of trade, cultivation, and selective breeding, the bean we have today spread across the entirety of the East and beyond, now be cultivated systematically throughout the entirety of the modern world. That is how this regional plant became so widespread. Now this is where I transition into the most calm and not heated at all portion of my video. Health impacts and social media misinformation. Yay! Soybeans are consumed by humans for a few reasons. Reason number one, they taste good. Reason number two, they can be made into many things. Soups, sauces, protein sources, oils for cooking, powders that can be added to things, milk to replace animal products, fermented into things, etc., etc. It's been a staple in the East since, let me check, what was it? We just talked about it. Oh yeah, the Bronze Age. And as the world has shrunk and cultures have met, foodstuffs and staples get passed around. Cuisines get introduced and fusions happen. All of this contributing to the rise of its consumption in both Western and Eastern markets. As there are socioeconomic, academic, health, and cultural motivators to study the impacts of what we eat on our health and quality of life, time to enter into the complex world of nutrition and health research. Let's summarize a portion of that health research and dispel some misunderstandings, both intentional and unintentional. First off, what are the macros? That is a gym rat joke. Broken down by 100 grams, a serving of soybean has fats, 20 grams, fiber, 9 grams, protein, about 37 grams, and sugars, about 7 grams. On top of the fats being of the polyunsaturated variety, the high protein and fiber, this is a food that is high in iron, potassium, and magnesium as well. It has a low glycemic index, meaning it doesn't spike your blood sugar as quickly as something like pure sucrose or glucose would. To better explain, take the difference between eating an apple or drinking apple juice. The sugar in the apple takes longer to be absorbed because it's being held in fibrous walls that are slowly being digested in your stomach, releasing the sugar over time, while the sugar in the apple juice hits your bloodstream almost immediately, even if the apple portion and the juice portions have the same amount of sugar. For individuals that have to regulate their blood sugar for medical reasons, tracking these things are an important factor in meal prep. Making sure that the higher glycemic foods are eaten with higher fiber and lower glycemic foods is often a way to make sure that you have an easier time avoiding sugar highs and sugar crashes. On top of this, the fats herein are of a type that many of us need more of in our diet, as we are often overnourished in saturated and undernourished in polyunsaturated fats. But since I mentioned it, let's talk about the fiber, because it's important too. To gain context on why the fiber content is important, I looked into the daily dietary fiber intake of the US, UK, Canada, Korea, China, Japan, and European Union's general populations. I cross-checked their health and regulatory agency guidelines with their monitoring of their population's dietary consumption and the datasets said groups used to come to the conclusions in their reports. In each of the before listed regions, sans the Scandinavian countries in the EU specifically, the reports show the general populations are not getting enough daily dietary fiber to meet the minimum recommendations. Also, noted in several cases, the trend line for the fiber is decreasing in their diets instead of increasing or being steady. Several economic factors shared across the board in these countries are encouraging the average person to eat grab-and-go quick foods, takeout, and easy-to-prepare meals that are lower in fiber over homemade and other higher fiber options that take more time or money. Contrary to popular online belief, this economic trend is not uniquely American. The regions listed are all showing the same effects and patterns. Across the board, the Gen Pop are all having the same problems meeting their fiber goals, except for the Scandinavian regions in Europe. Why is that? Well, from the reports, Scandinavian regions in Europe have a culinary tradition that includes several high-fiber ingredients in their diets, and that was the explanation for their fiber intake outlier status in comparison to their peers. I mean, like, how higher fiber can these traditionally higher fiber ingredients be? I mean, what, are they, like, eating trees, or... Okay. Well, carry on then. So why have I waxed poetic about fiber and tree bread and fast food within a soybean video? 1. Fiber in our diet has been strongly correlated with better health outcomes. Fiber is filling and can help people achieve a calorie deficit if they're trying to lose weight. Also, fiber intake is one of those quality of life type changes in which a slight shift in effort can have positive downstream effects throughout your health. 2. Since there are several ways that soybeans can be prepared, this is a relatively easy method to increase fiber intake. It can be as simple as a quick edamame side or beans cooked in with other ingredients. Also, several of the prepared types of soy products like tofu and textured vegetable protein are higher in fiber than their culinary alternatives. They can be used in conjunction with meat as a method of increasing fiber, with many populations getting a third or less of what they need at the minimum of fiber. Any alternatives to increase that consumption in an easy and affordable manner are attractive. 3. The type of fiber in soybeans has been studied, and the consensus in the literature to date is that yes, it is a good amendment in diets, especially if taken into context the cratering rate of fiber consumption that seems to be widespread throughout the economies of the planet. That pretty much gets the fiber portion out of the way, so let's transition into talking about the protein. We need to start by introducing a concept called protein quality. What is that? Protein quality is a metric that takes into account how complete the protein mixture is and how easy it is to digest and use. Let me clarify. The building blocks for protein sources, and therefore you, after you eat them, are a class of compounds called amino acids. For dietary purposes and the purposes of our discussion, amino acids can be broken down into essential and non-essential amino acids. Not every protein source has equal amounts of these amino acids, nor do they necessarily have all of them represented. Also, just because an amino acid is classed as non-essential, that isn't to say that you don't need them. You do. But then why do we call them non-essential? Because non-essential amino acids can be synthesized inside you from other things if you're not getting enough, while you must obtain essential amino acids from your diet or you're going to have problems. See my What Are the Ingredients series for examples of what can happen to you when you don't get an ingredient you need. So how do we know if something like steak or soybeans or peas or fish have all the amino acids we need? Simple. We analyze them and rate them. The FAO and the FDA use a protein digestibility model for grading protein quality. With this model, the goal was to grade proteins on how well they filled your essential and non-essential dietary needs. Using this model for analysis, the protein quality for soybean is very high, comparable to many meat sources. For several of the influencer types, they will fixate on one type of protein or one aspect of protein and state, "You must eat this thing or you are screwed. No, you don't have to eat a specific meat or drink milk to get high quality protein sources. Contrary to Instagram and TikTok gurus, you do not, in fact, have to be a strict carnivore to get your protein. In fact, it is recommended that you get your protein from a variety of different sources to ensure you get a healthy mix, partially due to several of these protein sources coming bundled with other nutrients like vitamins, minerals, and fiber, depending on what they are. So that's another reason not to fixate on just one type of food source. Therefore, given the minerals, lipid profile, fiber content, and a high-quality rating in its protein analysis, the hyperfixation that several fitness gurus have on specifically avoiding it while marketing high-meat dietary protocols and personal food coaching for health seems odd at best and suspect at worst. But that's my 2 cents. Since we now know what protein quality is and that yes, you can obtain your protein from many sources, let's talk about how this impacts muscle protein synthesis. Because, good lord. Alright, so let's just get this out of the way. There is a massive ongoing push in the bodybuilding, health influencing, and male influencing spheres in social media with regards to defining what is considered athletic, fit, active, etc. And the noise to signal ratio is abysmal. There's also a massive push to shove protein in everything. The amount of things that suddenly get made from whey and or cottage cheese is bordering on worrisome. The information quality is awful. Claims are just being made with no support other than "trust me, bro." There are people who are using peer-reviewed, medically sound information to make quality educational material. However, they are outpaced by the sheer dreck that gets put out by the influencer crowd. Work has been done with regards to protein type and muscle gain. Social media has taken liberties with the results and added things that are not supported by studies, but do support merch and coaching services. To sum up what actually has been looked at in controlled, peer-reviewed, and high-quality scientific circles. In short-term acute studies, soy versus whey have been compared to see their impacts on muscle protein synthesis in response to resistance exercise training. Also, protein from other plant and animal sources have been compared to one another as well. Whey is a whole protein source, which is to say it contains all amino acids for metabolism. It is also rich in the branched chain amino acid leucine, which the literature notes is very useful in muscle development. In acute studies, the whole whey protein sources with the BCAA isolates show chemical markers indicative of greater stimulation of muscle protein synthesis than soy. However, acute studies are not the best models for long-term anabolism analysis. Protein feeding in short intervals right after exercising is not the optimal model for determining the impact of protein amount or type on performance or development. When longer-term studies are also employed, ones in which the feeding throughout the day is viewed instead of an arbitrary window right after exercise, and which the muscle development over time is tracked versus an acute metabolic response, differences between whey and other protein regimens become more blurry. What is found to impact muscle gain under resistance training far more is the quantity of full amino acid protein sources and the quantity and quality of resistance training. Also, when amino acid profile of soy is analyzed using the standards at which we grade protein sources for their completeness and bioavailability, it rates right up there with meat and whey-based sources, so there is that as well. So the hypothesis that soy protein is counterproductive to muscle gain is not supported when the bigger picture is observed. Taking into account long-term observations and long-term impacts, the effect value differences between soy and corresponding whey sources become very narrow. Also, outside of elite performers who must dial in every aspect of their training, fueling, resting, supplementation, and performance-enhancing augmentations, the difference between meat or soy-based protein sources are not worth the effort for the general population. Eat, train, rest, repeat, and avoid shirtless people filming in videos in grocery stores. Listen to your primary care provider over people on the internet or on podcasts. That includes me, by the way. Your primary care provider trumps my statements as I have not been read into the protocols on your charts. As long as you are meeting your health goals in a fashion that you and your primary care provider agree on, if a Bronze Age pervert or their acolytes try to bully you or your vegetables, tell them to pound sand. Now that that is out of the way, remember when I mentioned that they're adding protein to every YouTube and TikTok recipe for weight loss? Do you ever wonder why that is? To answer that question, we're going to have to talk about hunger, satiation, and calorie deficits. Let's talk about what makes you go for that second helping. To talk about weight gain, loss, and hunger, we need to go over some key topics. Humans have something called the citric acid cycle that converts food into energy. It's how we can get calories from carbohydrates, lipids, and amino acids. Also, if you consume more calories than you use, you store that as fat. If you consume less calories than you use, your body first targets the fat, but then begins targeting other tissues like muscle to make up the difference. These two states are what are known as being in a calorie surplus or deficit. Satiety is the sensation of feeling full, and satiation signaling is a complex network of responses in your body to tell you that you've eaten enough. While carbs, lipids, and amino acids can all be processed into energy and stored as fat, the rate they do that and how satiating they are varies. Foods higher in protein and fiber tend to be more satiating per calorie consumed. Soybeans having both protein and fiber can lead to individuals feeling fuller faster with less calories than, say, for instance, a sugary drink. The satiety impact that protein has is one reason you've probably seen an explosion of people screaming protein, 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 and several content creators putting yogurt and cottage cheese in everything. And yes, you can generally always taste the cottage cheese. I don't care how much you blend it, freeze it, and call it ice cream. It's still cheese. So because things like protein sources take longer to process, and fiber bulks a food source but doesn't add to the calories, they both can prolong that feeling of fullness or make a person feel full faster than foods that process into glucose quick, fast, and in a hurry. So if you fill up on that, you won't go for seconds, thirds, or afternoon snacks that you forget that you ate. So that covers protein, fiber, and satiety. Now let's talk about something completely different. Here is where I'm going to get the heated comments if the fanboys are still watching. TLDR, because I am so tired of this in my professional life and in my social media feed. No, it is not going to spontaneously transition you. No, it is not going to give you prostate cancer. No, it is not going to give you breast cancer. No, it is not going to kill your gains. No, it is not going to make you infertile. No, it is not going to crater your testosterone. This is probably some of the most widely shared disinformation with regards to soy and human health, and this horse has been beaten to death by another horse that has been beaten to death by another horse. We are 3 horses deep in this analogy. What is wrong with you, Internet? And what have the horses done to you? So what is the core of all of these false claims? What do they all have in common? The going oversimplification and weaponized creative writing is basically the soy plant is full of chemicals that will somehow spike your estrogen and suddenly cause massive health problems for everyone, but especially men. Therefore, to counter it, eat as much red meat as possible. Oh, and buy my supplements and take my course. The proposed mechanism of harm was that certain compounds in the soybean, namely isoflavones, are endocrine disruptors. They're not, but we'll get into that after some definitions. The endocrine system is a communication network within the body. It's made up of a series of tissues like those in the pancreas, the thyroid, pituitary gland, etc. These tissues use hormones to send signals to other parts of the body and to control various bodily functions. Endocrine disruptors are compounds that make this communication break down in some way. While initial investigations in sheep and other livestock held possible concern, this isn't something that you should lose sleep over. Because sheep, sleep, never mind. Furthermore, there are compounds in organisms, specifically in this case in plant biology, that we refer to as homologs. Homolog, from an evolutionary biology perspective, refers to parts of the anatomy that have the same structure for a similar job, like the bones in flippers, bat wings, and hands, for example. In plant secondary metabolite research, we refer to homologs that are chemical. These are chemicals that are similar to, but not exactly like, compounds in mammals and other organisms that the plants make. Some of these are similar in structure due to the fact that they do similar functions in cellular biology for the plants that they do for the other organisms. Some of these compounds gave the plants' ancestors a reproductive advantage in their niche because of how they impact predators or other organisms exposed to them. An example of this, the structure of caffeine is very similar to a ligand that binds to adenosine receptors in your body, and when it does so, it causes an effect that I am quite sure you're probably aware of. Phytocannabinoids are very similar to endocannabinoids, so much so that research into the phytocannabinoids and their effects on neurochemistry, immune system responses, and energy regulation led to our understanding of the endocannabinoid system, and they continue to do so where research is permitted. There's an entire field of study with regards to the impacts of plant secondary metabolites on various aspects of human health, a field I am very familiar with. For our topic today, a particular class of compounds in soybeans, isoflavones, are a type of phytoalexins. Phytoalexins are compounds in plants released in response to an attack, and they are active antimicrobials. They rise and fall in response to either microbial or environmental stresses. While they are a defense response and expression can vary due to the environment, the trait that contributes most to isoflavone levels in beans is the variety of the plant. Varieties can possess stark differences in the expression levels of the phytoalexins. Now, why are we discussing this? Secondary metabolites that are defensive in nature, like phytoalexins, can possibly interact with your systems in your body. Just because you might not be the initial target, those homologs that you might possess could be close to the predators. This could be due to them performing the same function in you as they do in the target organism, and because of that, there could be an interaction. However, the interaction might not necessarily be the same. You can have different systems, and also there's always the mass issue. Take the before mentioned caffeine, cannabinoids. Also take several flavonoids, some of the complex polysaccharides and panax that interact with your inflammation pathways, etc. Several of these and their target organisms are lethal, but not necessarily so in humans. With that in mind, these particular secondary metabolites first came under academic scrutiny, strangely enough, due to sheep. Isoflavones in certain clover eaten by sheep were found to be endocrine disruptors by veterinarian science. The irony of the influencer trend of parroting various food myths being founded on a misunderstanding of sheep research isn't lost on me. This is a food staple for a large portion of the population. So if there are health risks, we need molecular bioscientists, endocrinologists, epidemiologists, and other specialists taking apart each aspect of this equation and deep diving it, which is what has happened for the past 30 years. To summarize the results, overall isoflavones pose more health benefits for human consumption than risk. They do not seem to act as endocrine disruptors. The fiber, the protein, and the secondary metabolites seem to work well within a balanced diet as a nutrition source. Consumption in a healthy diet with guidance from primary care providers showed positive outcome over positive outcome. However, since I am feeling the actuallys coming, I will hit the highlights. Realize this next section is summarizing decades of work from dozens of fields with multiple countries and thousands of scientists contributing. So this is going to be a speed run. Concerns for soybeans causing harm to the thyroid. Unfounded. The effect was only able to be achieved via mouse models. Further research in humans was unable to repeat the effects. Concerns for soybean-derived feminization. Unfounded. Overwhelming data show no impact on serum levels of testosterone or estrogen in men. None. I want to be clear, not a lack of evidence. Every mechanism that could possibly impact this were explored, with none being able to achieve the results. Concerns for soybean impact on men's fertility. Conflicted. Studies undertaken result in conflicting information, and more study is needed to come to any conclusion. There hasn't been enough research, and quite frankly, there are things we do know impact this. Things such as stress levels, pollution, hypertension, and obesity. Teasing out the impact of those variables over the isoflavones impact is difficult. Concerns for soybean impact on women's fertility hormones. Unfounded. While a mechanism was found in female mouse models for how it could possibly impact women, when expanded in further studies involving humans, there was difficulty in finding any significant effects on the women's hormones. Concerns for soybean impact on menstrual cycle. Inconclusive. There hasn't been enough actual work done on this specific facet to come to any guidance or conclusion. Further research is needed. Concerns for soybean impact on pregnancy. Inconclusive. We do not have enough data to see either positive or negative outcomes for pregnancy with regards to soybean consumption. More clinical trials, more trials for high consumption, and more studies are required. Concerns for soybean impact on breast cancer risk. Unfounded. Extensive work has been undertaken to see if isoflavones in soy products pose an increased risk for breast cancer. While there are impacts at the chemical level that lead to initial interest, with further work, the answer came to no. While there have been no clinical trials on breast cancer survivors to see if soy products increase the risk of reoccurrence, several World Breast Cancer organizations advise that soy products are safe for consumption by survivors. However, they still advise prudence when developing healthy eating habits and for women to work with their doctors for their specific regimens. Concerns for soybean impact on child development, precocious puberty, or developmental endocrine disruption. Further research needed, however, no clear relationship or unfounded with the current results. While there were initial findings with a possible link with precocious puberty, further work refuted this. More cohort studies with wide ranges of exposure levels and more larger scale randomized controlled trials are needed. There is only weak evidence of its impact on hormone levels in children. However, large studies face many challenges on the inclusion of preteen children safely. There is little evidence supporting developing endocrine disruption, as while isoflavones could be shared through the umbilical cord, the hormone levels in the developing children remained unchanged. Are you seeing the trend yet? For the past 30 years, we have been studying isoflavones and their impact on human health. We have also studied the impacts of soy as a whole on health. The results generally come back as safe and positive. So when the claims that somehow consumption drastically impacts your endocrine system crop up, there is little or no basis for them. So keep that in mind the next time you see some roided up guy with a podcast mic talking over some weird music playing in a short. So there it is, another long one in the can. The history, the economy, and the biology of soybean and you. Hopefully this helps. Hopefully you learn something. Hopefully you feel more comfortable about your food choices and less intimidated by them. Remember to like, comment, and subscribe and all that, and I'll see you in the next one. Remember, you should never stop learning because the tests never end. Peace. Oh, I'm sorry, we're not done just yet. I didn't read all of these papers not to cite them at the end. I'm not a savage or a DramaTube channel. Get ready to screenshot as they scroll. Remember, we cite our sources.